morning, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Build with Glide, where we go under the hood on existing Glide apps and build new apps from scratch. I'm your host, Andy Claremont. I'm the head of community here at Glide, and we are in the midst of a special multi-part series showing you how to build Glide apps using OpenAI. And today, I am particularly excited to have Robert Petito joining us. Robert is a prolific YouTuber. He shares Glide tips and tutorials on his YouTube channel. And for every guest that we've had on this series, Robert's name keeps coming up as one of the best resources for learning how to use Glide. So with that, no pressure.
No.
With that, Robert, welcome to Build with Glide.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate that.
I'm so excited to have you on here. So before we get into the actual build, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? What do you do?
Sure. I'm a K-12 educator. I work at a private school in Georgia. And while most of my day is spent, troubleshooting devices or working with staff and students, my nights and weekends, I do Glide.
Love it. How did you discover Glide in the first place?
Man, so this is back in 2019. And at the time, I was about to give a presentation on how to build dashboards on top of a Google Sheet. And I had this whole presentation all queued up. I was using some other platform, which I'm not using anymore. And at probably a week before I go to give the presentation, they changed their pricing structure and make it completely untenable for teachers. So I go, okay, so I felt bad trying to promote this platform to teachers who couldn't afford it. So I was trying to figure out some, a different alternative. Ended up remembering this product called Glide out there that purports to do the same thing. Ended up falling in love with Glide because it offered two-way sync, whereas other platform just kind of read from a Google Sheet and that was it. And at the time, Glide was free, so that was also a bonus. And ended up building out a whole presentation on how to use Glide to offer dashboards and interactivity on top of a Google Sheet. The teachers loved it. I had about 30 of my colleagues ask me to build a solution for them. So now I was just kind of in the thick of it on the community forum and in the help docs, just kind of learning so I could build these solutions for my colleagues. And, the rest is history.
Nice. Well, when was it that you first discovered Glide?
So back in 2019.
Okay.
And
almost right at the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, I think Glide has only been around for like a year, maybe prior to that. I mean, this is back before you could even create relation columns. Like you had to create
early Glide
architecture in the Google Sheet in order to make, it was crazy.
Yeah. As I kind of mentioned at the top, lots of Glide users cite you when I ask, like, how did you learn about Glide or how did you learn Glide?
Mm-hmm.
They keep bringing up your YouTube channel, all of the tips and tutorials and everything that you've put out there. Why did you decide to go that route and start putting stuff out on YouTube about Glide?
Part of it was just to pay back, to pay it forward. Right. So I had been learning so much from some of the key community members at the time. Jeff Hager, Mark, who's the CTO of Glide, was in the community forum quite a bit. And as I was learning things, like one of the highs that I get is also sharing my knowledge. So I felt not only was I in the community, I wanted to show people how I was doing some of the things that I was doing. And I was really only creating a few different videos specifically on gamification in Glide, creating points and badges and leaderboards and things like that. But it caught on and people were starting to ask me, hey, can you show me how to do this or show me how to do that? And so I ended up kind of devoting some playlists specific to Glide builds. And my YouTube channel had been around for probably 3-4 years or so, but mostly it was for education, kind of technology focused. But the moment I started posting, videos about Glide, my YouTube channel kind of blew up. So it just kind of felt nice to help others out with the YouTube with the YouTube videos, the YouTube channel, and at the same time, kind of again pay it forward for all the work that I've received moving forward.
I love that ethos of paying it forward. And one of the things that I love about the community that we have at Glide is that knowledge sharing that happens.
Mhm.
Um, it's such a nice thing to have when you are new to a product, new to a platform, and just trying to, learn the ins and outs to be able to go to a community and find someone like yourself who's going out there and sharing the knowledge and paying it forward. So we're here to build a help desk companion app.
Yeah.
I would love to just hand the controls over to you to,
Sure, that'd be
to show
great.
us how it's done.
Okay, so here's the premise, right? I mean, one of the great things about leveraging artificial intelligence, I mean, and what's crazy is how new it is too, right? This is like Chat GPT was first announced like I know earlier, but first really became a thing in like November, right? And so it's only been several months or so since we've been kind of in the thick of it. But what I love about it is that it just completely goes ahead and makes your existing platforms more robust. So the first thing I want to share is just how to leverage OpenAI apart from ChatGPT. I think most people are familiar with how to get to ChatGPT and start asking it questions, but in terms of being able to leverage OpenAI in your app, you actually have to go outside of ChatGPT and go to the source, right, which is OpenAI's website. And so after logging into OpenAI, you can go over here to the API section, and inside of your profile here, you can view your API keys, create API keys. I think you have to attach a credit card because as the API gets called, I mean, it's fractions of a cent, but at the same time, if you'll need to pay for it eventually, right? So you do have to connect a credit card, and then you can view your API key. And then after viewing your API key, you can copy that key and just simply integrate it directly into Glide. So we're going to show you that next. All right. So in my help desk app here, I haven't done any sort of anything in this app except for preload it with a little bit of data. I mean, because otherwise we'd be here for the next few hours while I'm populating data. That'd be really boring. So I do have some users in here, people who will be using the help desk app, let's say. I have the inventory. So these are devices that maybe your company is using, organized by brand, name, and model, and I've combined them to form an actually unique name. Fine. Okay, then I have assignments, and these are what any good like help desk would have. It's just assigning devices to a person, so that way we know who has what, and that's really all it is. So we know that we have this person, and these people have these particular devices, and that's all this sheet is at the moment. All right, then we have maybe a knowledge base. This knowledge base, as you see, is very thin because maybe our help desk support team is a one-man show or a two-man show, and they just don't have the time to create documentation on all of the hundreds of devices that they're supporting at the moment. And maybe they're currently just sending them out to the proprietary sources, right? So they're sending people out to the Apple website to say, hey, just search for it and find the documentation or something like that. But as you'll see, we won't need to do that very soon. And then I have a spot for tickets, and we're actually not going to leverage this quite yet, but you'll see that this is a spot where we can maybe list out some issues that these people are having. Okay, so the first step in order to add OpenAI to your Glide app is to go over to Settings, Integrations, and then you'll scroll through this list of integrations until you get to OpenAI. Because it's one of the more popular ones, you'll find it at the top. And you'll simply just add it directly to your app. Okay. What you'll need to do is add your API key. So I have that here off in the corner. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste that in. Okay, and that's it. OpenAI has now been added to our app, right? So there's no coding involved in order to call libraries or anything like that. I mean, it's just, that's what we get. And as you can see, these are all the different features that you have available now to you in your Glide app. We're not going to use all of these. If you're interested in seeing most of how these work, I do have a video on my YouTube channel that kind of goes through, I would say, at least 13 of the 14 of these here. But the ones that we're going to focus on today are some of the more popular ones, and also the more powerful ones as well. And that's sending message to ChatGPT with history, without history, and then maybe doing a summarize and maybe answering questions about a table, which where OpenAI can scan your existing database and provide insight on the data that is contained inside of your own tables. All right, so now that OpenAI has been added, okay, one of the first things that I like to think of when building out any solution in Glide, let alone OpenAI, is where is the data living, right? And then working backwards, right? Your data should always be organized based upon the functionality. You don't want to create some functionality and then realize later you have to go back and change how your data is structured. All right. So what I'm envisioning here is we have an employee. An employee is going to bring open this app and it's going to ask it a question, right? Maybe something about their own device as well. So we're going to want to add a section in our app where it has context of the devices that they own. Okay. And then from there, we want to have it ask a question. And then when they submit their question, then OpenAI does its thing and provides a response. So if we're having our users submit questions to the app, then we want to make sure that we have some sort of log table of those questions. We could leverage this tickets column or table, but I think I want to reserve that for more of like the official tickets that they're going to submit, not just their requests on questions. So maybe what I'm thinking here is we'll have another table altogether for just the requests. And then if they decide they want to open a ticket with that request, then they can submit it to the tickets table after the fact. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a brand new table here. I'm going to use a Glide table. And we'll call this requests. Now you see that there's nothing scarier than an open blank screen, right? So what we're going to do here is we're going to fill this table with information that we would need to know about this request. All right, so let me check one thing here. And correct. Okay, so the first thing we need to know is what does the data need from us? So if we're going to leverage OpenAI chatbot, where we also want to save our history, so that when a user has a follow-up question about the response, then the OpenAI model knows the context, then we actually have to format our table in a certain way. And there's no way to really know what that is unless you start adding the component. So now that I have this table set up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of come back to our layout here. And we're going to start building out this OpenAI functionality. And this is exactly how I learned how to do it the very first time I tried to integrate OpenAI. So that's what I'm going to do here too. I'm going to pretend that we're just novice users trying to figure out how to add OpenAI for the very first time. So all I have on this screen so far is just a container with some text, but we need to start adding some buttons in order to allow our users to ask the question. So I'm going to go ahead and add a button component. And we can choose between button block or button. They're actually the same component, just one already has two buttons built into it already. We'll start with just a singular button. And then what we want to do is bring open a screen where our users can start typing something in. This could be a form screen, or it could just be a new screen with a form container on it. I really love the form container in Glide. Let me show you what that looks like. So let's rename this button, ask a question about your device. Okay. Or we could even be something, yeah, that's okay. Ask a question about your device. And we can give it a nice pretty icon if we'd like. Maybe one of these little devices icons like this. And what you'll notice here is that if you add a second action at some point, you see how it gets cut off. So what's a nice alternative is actually using the tiles view here, where you can actually see the entire text along with the button. So I think I'm going to stick to a tiles button layout here. All right, and then this action is just going to be to show a new screen where we're going to have a dedicated interface for asking the question to OpenAI. I could build this out right here on this screen, but if I plan on using this main screen for other things, I don't want it to get too convoluted or too muddled. So I want a dedicated screen for just this functionality. All right, so what I'm going to do instead of show notification is I'll show a new screen instead. And so when I hit the button, now I'm on a brand new screen. All right, so right now this screen has the context of the table that I'm in, which is my user profile. But we don't need any of this. So I'm actually going to trash all of these. And we can give this a new title. We'll give it a custom title of maybe like ask me a question, support request, something like this. So we'll say tech support request. All right, and then from here, we want to maybe prompt our user what it is that they want to do. All right, I'm going to show you one way to get started with it, and then a second way to actually build in some more context. So the first thing that I want to do is ask a question, and I want to use a form container for this. So if I search for form inside of the insert component menu, we see that we can add in a form container. And then from here, it's going to ask us, well, which table do you want to write to? So I want to write to our requests table. So on the form container, I'm going to choose or change my target table to our requests table. Now, right now, we only have one column inside of our requests table, and we need more than that. Okay, so what I'm planning on doing here is maybe let's pretend this is our question, right? Our content that we're going to submit to OpenAI. After it receives this information, I want OpenAI to generate a response. And I also want it to eventually allow us to have the ability to ask it a follow-up question, right? So for that reason, after the form gets submitted, we're going to leverage this after submit action in order to actually call the OpenAI integration. So I'm going to change our after submit action to our OpenAI. So you see all these different integrations at the bottom of this list of actions here. So we have OpenAI. And again, we can do any of these things as part of this on submit action. And what I want to do is I want to send a message to ChatGPT with history. That way it has, again, some sort of context if I decide to ask it a follow-up question. Okay. Now, where is this message history being saved? Well, the message history is going to be inside of our requests table. Okay, but how do we set up the table? What's nice is that Glide gives us this little eye over here. Can we see it in the screenshot? Yes, we can. Okay, that's good. Okay, and it sees that we must have 4 columns. It must have a role column, a content column, a session ID column, and a timestamp column. So see that these are the 4 columns that we have to add. And again, there was no way to really know this until we started adding the integration. So now that I know, now I can go back to my table and add these 4 columns. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly take a screenshot here. You probably won't be able to see it on your side, but I can see it here on my side, which is nice. And so now I can just kind of refer to this as I go to create my data column. All right, so I'm going to pause what I'm doing here on the layout. I'm going to go back to my data, go back to my requests table, and I'm going to add in those 4 columns. All right, so we need to have a role column, and the role column has to have one of 3 particular values. It can either be a system, a user, or an assistant. And for all of our requests here, it's going to be the user because we're the ones submitting questions to this table. So we need to be able to populate the word user inside of this table whenever we submit a new request. And that's, again, one of the reasons why I like to use a form container, and I'll show you that in just a second. All right, so role. Okay, then we also need to have content. This is one of those 4 columns. This is the actual question or request to OpenAI. So the actual question that they're typing in, we want to make sure that it lands in this content screen. Okay, next will be a session ID. Okay, this is how we know what thread we're going to give to this particular chat. So this session ID can be whatever we want it to be as long as it's consistent for within that history. So it could be, if you wanted to have kind of a global history, you could just use the user's ID or the user's email address, and then whenever it calls upon this chatbot here, it'll know the context of that specific person. If you wanted to concatenate things, maybe it's like the user ID along with the device they're talking about, right? Maybe that could be the session ID. We'll keep things simple and just do the user ID for now here, and I'll show you how to add that in a second. And the last thing here is a timestamp. Okay, and this can be a date time column. All right. Okay, now the last column here that we need that actually wasn't in that list of 4 is the response, right? So when OpenAI analyzes our request, we want it to go ahead and then provide that response so we can see it. So we're going to call this response, name it whatever we want. And then this is where the answer will be. Okay, so we have all the columns we need now. Let's go back to our layout. And we can see now that in our form container, because we've targeted the requests table here, we now see in the additional columns those 4 items. All right, so it starts us off with just a text entry, which is fine. And this is the question that we want to ask. So we can point our text entry here to our content column. So now, when we go to submit our request, the OpenAI action knows what that content is. All right, but we should probably rename this, not to name, but to ask a question. Something like this. And again, kind of keep things simple for today's tutorial. And we can make it required. Fine. All right, so after they ask their question, when we hit submit, we want OpenAI to do its thing and provide us a response. So again, we're going to come back to our form container and revisit our after submit action here. And here's where we need to fill out the rest of this action. All right, so we've labeled it as requests. Let's select the columns that we'll need. Okay, good. It already knows that those are the columns that we need for part of this request. We could always rename these after the fact if we wanted to, but I'm going to leave them as is for today's purposes. Okay. And then the prompt. So the prompt is one of the most crucial features on an OpenAI integration call here. This is where you're telling OpenAI what its job is and how to answer the question. So I actually have a preformed container over here, just so you don't have to watch me type things. It's going to be something like this. Okay. So we want to tell our OpenAI that they are a help desk technician. They want to be able to interpret the issues and requests for help and reply with clear, concise, and easy to follow instructions, because our end users might not understand a whole lot of technical jargon, right? So keep things clear, keep things concise, make it an instruction set so that way OpenAI knows that maybe they should list things out step by step on how to achieve the solution. Okay, so the message itself for now is going to be our content, right? Which is what we're typing in here. The session ID, again, can be whatever we want it to be. In this case, I'm just going to make it the user's email address. That way, whenever somebody asks a question, their email address gets added as the session ID and then has context of who has submitted that request and can remember going back for that particular user. The model, okay, so by default, it's the 3.5 turbo. This is probably the standard as it comes to OpenAI models. And then from here, we can, if you wanted to go to GPT-4, you could, but 3.5 turbo is actually less expensive. And so if you're going to have your users submit lots and lots and lots of requests and you're trying to be a little bit more budget conscious, 3.5 turbo is sufficient. All right, and then we can adjust our model. So here's where we can adjust the temperature, the maximum length, and our frequency penalty. For temperature, I don't want it to be too creative with the solution. I want it to pick a solution that is a known solution, especially for the question that they're asking. I don't want them to invent how to solve this problem. So we're going to keep our temperature very low. I'm going to say 0.1. Okay. And for our maximum length, now it might give us a lot of steps in order to solve a particular issue. So we want to make sure that it's not just some sort of brief snippet, but an actual full instruction set. So for this reason, I'm going to crank it up to maybe 2,500 tokens. You might not use all 2,500, but at least now it won't get cut off on step 6 when there was really a step 7 and a step 8 as well. And I'm going to leave frequency penalty alone. It's optional. I'm not going to do that anyway. And then under result, this is where we need to call the response column. Okay, so again, if you want to add in OpenAI chat with history, these are the 5 columns that you'll need. All right, so response. Okay, so our OpenAI integration is done. We have our API key already set. So now when we go to ask a question, right, now it's a matter of how we display the answer. There's a couple of ways we can do this. One way could just be to list out the questions and the answers underneath this little question box here. I'll show you what that looks like. So if we were to do maybe a collection of a list like this, and our list is going to point to our requests. And the title of this can be the question that we asked, and the description can be the response. We don't need any images. We don't need a search bar necessarily. And we don't need them to add or edit anything. We just want to see the actual response itself. Okay, now we also want to filter to make sure we're only getting our own responses. So we'd either put row owners on this table, or we can just filter the data to where the session ID, in this case, it's the user's email address, is the user profile email. If we weren't using the session ID to be the email, what we could also do as part of this form container here is we could add another column. Actually, let's go ahead and do that anyway. Under the requests here, we can add another column as to who the owner of this data is. We can make it an email column here. Let's go ahead and submit our owner to be the email here. Okay. So let's see, we have our OpenAI integration done. So as part of the form container, we're going to set the owner's email address to be the owner. The role, in this case, is always going to be user. The session ID, again, can be the user's email address if you wanted to. The timestamp is going to be the current date and time that they submitted the response. And then the response we're leaving blank because OpenAI is filling that out for us. Okay, so just like this. All right, so again, on this collection of the requests, we're going to go ahead and filter our data to now where owner is the signed in user. So that way we're only ever going to see our responses, and that way they don't get muddled with other users. Okay, let's try this out. So I'm going to ask the question about a laptop that's broken. So I could say something like, my MacBook won't connect to the internet. All right, I'm going to hit submit. When I hit submit, we see that now I have that new response here. If I go into the data to my requests table, okay, we see that everything kind of got filled out here, right? Here's my content, here's my session ID, my timestamp, and then we see eventually here that OpenAI generated a response. And look at that, it's got steps 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Oh, it's a very empathetic help desk technician here that they're sorry to hear they're having trouble connecting.
What a nice little touch.
Right. and then if none of these steps resolve the issue, it might be helpful to contact your internet service provider. Okay, fine. So now we want to display these, right? So again, if we were to display it right here as part of this collection, okay, then we see it looks something like this. Now, if we were to continue asking questions here, like maybe I want to ask a follow-up question about the third step here of resetting my network settings. I could say, how do I reset my network settings? And because we're using the same session ID, in this case, our email address, the OpenAI model already has context of what it is we already asked. And it'll know that we're talking about our MacBook still. So again, I hit submit. Our collection here should probably be organized in reverse chronological order. So we see the newest on top. So we can sort by timestamp in reverse order. And look at that. Oops, oh, there we go. We'll get that in a second. So how do I reset my network settings? And again, to reset your network settings on a Mac, so it knows, right, here how you can do that. Great. All right. So now we have a nice little context of how to get a solution to one of the issues that I was facing about my particular MacBook. So now this is freeing up our help desk technicians to focus on more severe issues or to have more of a personal touch if someone were to go and actually submit a ticket. Our help desk technician already knows the context of what they were asking, knows what solutions kind of were already provided, and they can see this context before they even meet with this person to maybe discuss some of those things. So now our help desk technician kind of has some insight already and can provide some deeper kind of care to our users. All right, so this is fine. But what if we could make this app even smarter by allowing our users to ask questions about the technology that it's already been assigned to, rather than creating that kind of this free response thing? So here's what we're going to do. In our data, we already know the assignments for each of our individual users. Okay, so let's go ahead and view this app as one of those users. Let's view it as Ivan here. Okay, and Ivan has some devices. And so now we need to know which devices Ivan owns. So if I were to come back to my users table here, right, I can go ahead and make a relation from this user to their devices. So I'm going to say relation to devices to be a relation column. And I'm going to relate the email to the assignments employee column here. We'll match multiple. All right, so now we have the context of what devices they own. So now it knows that it owns the Apple iPad, the MacBook, the Dell, and the Apple TV. Okay, so now when we go to ask our question, right, we can actually have some context. So back in our layout here, yes, I can still offer maybe a free response here if we wanted to. But instead, I want to offer some prompting. So let's create a little bit more of a robust form here. Help desk technicians are going to kind of want that anyway. So back in our data, in our requests table, we want to fill this with some other information. So maybe we want to know what the actual device is, like a tagged device. So we're going to add another column. Let's just add it to the right here. And we'll say device. Be a text column, and we're going to add in the device that they're referring to. Maybe we want to even prompt them to how we want them to connect a device to something else. So we could create another column here called inquiry, maybe inquiry type, where we're asking OpenAI how to either connect this device to something or how to troubleshoot this device. So we'll need a choice component based upon that. In my options table, I already have that here under connect and troubleshoot. So we can offer this as maybe a choice component. And then maybe we want to prompt our user, like what do they want to connect to? Wi-Fi, printer, copier, projector. These are some of the main things that I guess that some users would want to connect to, right? So under our response, we have device, we have inquiry type. Maybe we have a connected device. So what are they trying to connect to? Okay. And then what we want to do is provide OpenAI with a model of this combination. So we're going to ask our OpenAI that they want to connect maybe their MacBook to a printer, right? Just using a couple of different forms. All right, so first let's build out the form, and then we'll come back over here and create that prompt. So instead of just doing a free response now, which we know works, let's go ahead and ask our form to will it be a bit more robust and kind of guide our user through the submission process here. So the first thing here is going to add a choice component to our form container. And inside of this form, or inside of this choice, we're going to ask them what do they want to do. So we're going to write here to the inquiry type. Are they trying to connect something or troubleshoot something? The choices live in our options table. The values will be the request type, and we're going to display it as the request type display. And maybe we can do like a radio button like this, and we'll make it required. Okay, so under the label here, we could say like, what are you trying to do? We have here connect one of my devices to something else, or one of my devices just isn't working. Okay, so if they select connect one of my devices to something else, now the model knows that they're trying to connect. And if the model is connect, maybe we want to display then a choice of to what device is it that you're trying to connect. So I'm going to add another choice component. This choice component is going to be the user devices. So our source here, first we're going to write to the device. And then the source here is going to be our user profile relation to devices. Oops, user profile relation to devices. And in this case, our values are going to be the device itself. Okay, so now we can ask it which device. And maybe instead of a checkbox, we could do a drop down like this. So now they're selecting the device that they want to connect. So maybe their Apple MacBook, right? And if I were viewing this as somebody else, I would have a completely different list of items because this is user specific. So again, now the app is a little bit smarter, and we're providing our OpenAI model with something more specific as well. All right, and then we want to ask them, what do they want to connect to? So again, that's another choice component. And here, it's like, what are you trying to connect? So the source here is going to be our options, connection type, right? And we can prompt it to be, what are you connecting to? And we're going to write this to our connected device. Actually, I think we want to do one more thing. Let's actually add one more column. So in our requests table, the connected device maybe should be something specific. And so instead we want to have a connection type. So we're going to add a column to the right here and say connection type. Okay, so we have a connection type and then the connection device. And so we're actually going to write this to get the connection type. All right, so let's say I'm trying to connect my MacBook to a printer. All right, the very last thing here is we also have context based upon our inventory database, what the list of available printers are that exist in our organization. So I can again add one more choice component and have them select one of those printers. So our source here is going to be our inventory, right? But as you can see here, this is more than just printers. This is copiers, this is printers, this is devices, right? The values here are going to be the actual item itself, right? But a lot of these things aren't printers. So we can filter this list based upon what they chose. So we're going to filter this list to where the device type is what they selected, the screen connection type. And look at that. Now we just have printers here. And the reason why this works is because I selected printer and my inventory already knows the list of available printers based upon this keyword. These would be copiers, projectors, my Apple TVs. And now Bluetooth devices, I don't have anything. So maybe I want to prompt them for the device. Okay, so in my connection, first off, this needs to be the connected device. Okay, so the last thing here is what if they select something that doesn't exist in our inventory, like the Bluetooth device here? Well, then we can provide that open response, right? So this could be a text entry component. And this text entry will point to our connected device. You say like, what device? But we only want this to display if they've selected Bluetooth device. So we're going to add a visibility condition on it so that it only gets displayed when the connection type includes Bluetooth. Okay. So if they don't choose Bluetooth, they don't have to answer that free response. They'll select the device that happens to exist as part of our organization. Okay. So all of this now gives us a bunch of context. We want to connect our devices. We want to connect our Apple MacBook to an Apple TV, and this is the specific model. Okay. And this is the information we want to feed to OpenAI to give us a very, very specific answer, which means we have to adjust our onSubmit action slightly. Currently, what we're doing is in our form container, we're sending a message to ChatGPT, and the message here was just the content, which was just our free response. But now instead of it being this content, this free response, we want to maybe craft a content to send to OpenAI based upon their selections. So the first thing we have to do, and you're going to see this often when you go to create OpenAI integration, is that you'll craft your prompt using a template column in Glide. And then you feed that template column to OpenAI. So that's what we have to do here too. We have to create a template column that's going to merge all of these things together, and then we'll send that template column to ChatGPT. Okay, so I'm going to pause here on the fronts before I submit this form. I'm going to go back to our data, and we're going to go ahead and create that prompt. So again, it knows context now by these 4 things. And we eventually want to send a template of these 4 things over to our content column here. Okay, so let's go ahead and create that template. And we're going to call this connection template. This is going to be a template column. And here's where we can give our OpenAI template something to do. So we know we want to connect something, and they've chosen that under the inquiry type. Okay, so it'll look like this. Okay, if we were to put in some dummy data here, well, it's okay. I'll do that secondly. All right, so we're going to connect. What are they connecting? So they're going to connect, and then they're going to connect their device. What are they connecting to? So we're connecting device to something else. They're going to connect it to the connection type. So they're connecting it to a printer, connecting it to the Wi-Fi, connecting it to the copier, right? And then we can put maybe in parentheses what it is, the actual device itself. Okay, so this looks really funny over here, but once they actually fill out the form, it'll be complete. Now, this is what we want to send to OpenAI. We don't just want it to read this value here. So what we first have to do is send this template to this column and then have OpenAI do its thing. So what we can do here is on our after submit action, we're going to go ahead and adjust it slightly here. What I love that Glide did over this past year is that if you needed to adjust your action to have it become more robust and make it a custom action, it doesn't lose any of the work you already did. So we're going to turn our OpenAI action into a custom action. So to do that, you just select the action editor, and we're going to say create new action. And when I do that, you'll see that my send message to ChatGPT is still there with all my fun things. Whew, I don't have to redo all that, which is nice. Okay, let's rename this set content and call OpenAI. So before we have it just call OpenAI, we first need to take that template column and add it to the content of our form. So to do that, we use a set column. And this is the only additional thing we have to do here. Okay, so we're going to set the content, which is what OpenAI is looking at. We're going to set it to be that template column that got submitted. So how this works in terms of sequence is that you fill out the form information is now there. It already knows then it creates this template column. We're going to set that template column to be the content, and then OpenAI is looking at that content as part of this question. Okay, let's see how this works. So done. All right, ready to submit my form, right? Where we have all of these fun things. Okay, I hit submit, And fingers crossed. So it knows to connect Apple MacBook Air M1 to an Apple TV. If you give it just a second, there we go. So to connect your Apple MacBook Air to M1 to an Apple TV, you can use the built-in AirPlay feature, which is the correct response. And it knows exactly on your MacBook Air where to go, how to do the things. And because we've provided it with enough tokens, it has all of the correct responses here. And again, note if you want to stream specific media content, blah, 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 that's it. You successfully connected your MacBook Air. Hooray, right? So I didn't have to create this documentation as a help desk technician. ChatGPT is smart enough to figure it out based upon this specific context. And this was really no work at all. Now, the last thing that I want to do here is that this prompt connect Apple MacBook Air is kind of ugly. It'd be nice to maybe clean this up a little bit. That way, if I want to go back and refer to this at a later date, then it's not as, again, it's just a little bit prettier. So one last thing here that we can do is we can provide a prettier title for this thing. So I'm going to come over here to my data requests, and we want to take this content and just make it look prettier. So I'm going to add a column to the right here. Let's call this content display. And we can actually use OpenAI to do this as well. So I'm going to search for OpenAI, and we want to, let's still use ChatGPT, but we don't need history for this. So we're going to send message to ChatGPT. Let's see, our prompt is going to be something a little bit prettier. Maybe we want to do this. We're going to create a short title for this item. Don't include any model numbers, just the actual item itself. And we're going to start each title with a gerund, which is like a verb starting with ing or ending with ing, like connecting or troubleshooting or helping or something like that. Okay, and our message is going to be the content here. And when I do that, if I were to just leave everything else alone, now we have a nice display instead, right? Connecting Apple MacBook Air to Apple TV via AirPlay, right? Resetting network settings and so forth. And so now if I were to view this item, right, we could actually make that our nice content display. And then underneath, we could have our instructions. And our instructions are going to be in that response, like that. Okay, so just using a little bit of OpenAI, right, we can make this look really, really pretty. So the only thing that I would want to change on this is maybe instead of viewing the list right from beneath here, right, maybe we want to go directly to this screen, right? So all we would have to do is adjust our onSubmit action to our form container. And we would just say show details screen for this item, being the item that we just submitted. Okay, so again, let's try something else. Let's connect one of our devices. Let's do our Dell in this case. Let's connect it to a printer, and let's connect it to the Brother HL printer. I hit submit. Okay, oh, it was supposed to. Oh, maybe we should show our detail screen first because it's waiting to do the thing. Okay, so it's actually waiting to do the thing before we do the thing. All right, let's try that one more time. Set column value, show detail screen. Yeah, okay. Connect one of my devices, MacBook Air, printer, Brother, submit. There we go. Now, the one thing that you'll notice here is that we're starting to kind of, we have like this kind of lag as to when the device or the instruction set actually pops up. So even though this answer is correct, we want a better user interface to make that happen. So one thing we can do here is we can add an if then else column in our requests table to give us like a, hey, we're working on it kind of thing while the response is still blank. So this is something I do often in OpenAI as well. I'll add a column to the right here. I'll call this if response to be an if then else column. I'm going to say if the response is empty, which means that OpenAI hasn't generated that response yet, then we can say, crafting a response. Please wait. Otherwise, we'll display the actual response itself. Okay, and that's what we'll display here rather than the actual response. All right, so if we're to see this one last time here, let's connect one of my devices. Let's connect my MacBook Air to a projector, this Epson power light, submit, crafting a response, please wait. And again, it should only take several seconds before the response actually gets sent through. And again, so it knows we have an Apple MacBook Air. It knows we have a USB-C port on that MacBook Air. It knows we have to do spotlight search and all the things. So yeah, this would be a pretty good response here. So I guess the last step on this help desk app would be to like, what if this doesn't solve your issue? We should probably ask our help desk to do something about this, right? So what I would do is I would add a button at the bottom here. And we could either do one of two things. Either this solved our, right, this was a solution, great, or this, we need more help. So our buttons here, it could be something like, this solved my issue, or I need more help. And again, if you don't want things to be cut off, you can use tiles so you can see it here, right? Our icons could be a check, or I need more help. This solved my issue. Maybe we want to mark all of these requests as solutions. So in our data table under the requests, maybe we want to have a marked as solution column. So here we're going to do just a Boolean. And if they mark it as a solution, all we have to do is just mark this true. We use a set column for that. And we'll just mark the solution as true. And then maybe we don't want to show this button bar if they marked it as a solution because they don't need more help. So we can set this whole button block to have a visibility condition of when marked as solution is not checked. And so if they marked it as the solution, then maybe we display a nice little hint text to give our users some visual feedback here. Marked as solution. What's great is that this data lives inside of our database for our help desk technicians to see as well. So they can see which requests were marked as a solution. So then they can take those solutions and just copy and paste them over to the knowledge base and create the knowledge base right from there. You can obviously make that happen within the app, but we don't have time to get into that today. All right, so we can say marked as solution is checked. Okay, so if this solved their issue, great. Okay, now that you see it was marked as a solution, and in your data, our help desk technicians can maybe have a screen where they can see things that were marked as solutions and be able to get that response and add that to their knowledge base. And then if it wasn't their solution, right? Let's go back to our data here and unmark that. And if they need more help, well, here's where you can add some integration, right? Maybe we want one last thing. We want to be able to send some data to our help desk about this particular issue. So we can craft one last request here. This will be a message to help desk. And we can just do a template column. So we need some context. We need to know who it was, what the issue was, what the solution was. We can say proposed solution. This will be the inquiry. And this is our user. And we can just fill out those 1, 2, 3 with the device, or sorry, with the information from our form. So that's our user. Here was the inquiry, and here was the proposed solution response, right? And so they could push this button, and maybe that button sends that message either via email, or you can use any of the other integrations that Glide has to offer, Slack, Microsoft Teams, Discord, whatever platform your help desk is using in order to get that information so they can have some follow-up response to this user. So there's so much we can do with this, right? And we're only scratching the surface as to how we can leverage this with OpenAI and Glide. So I kind of want to stop here and kind of ask questions. So Andy,
We have a good little list of questions here.
I'm sure we do. And I want to make sure we have time to answer all these.
No worries. Yeah, what I love about this and how far we've gone in this build is that as we've gone through, you've already made some calls as you were building, like, hey, what if we do this instead? So you're making these improvements on the fly to the user experience just as you're building. And that's always fun to see.
Oh, for sure. Right.
And for everyone else who's watching this either now or in the future, seeing the starting point here, I know for myself at least, I'm thinking about, where can we go from here? We have the starting point. What are all the other features and capabilities that we could add to this app?
Mm-hmm.
But that's for another time. So let's get into the questions. So Sherry asked in registration, how could we make a support chatbot like this available without logging into the app?
Gotcha. So if the app has no context as to who the user is, you can still use the OpenAI integration just fine. The only thing you might lose is that session ID, right? So if you wanted to have a history of your chatbot or chat request, it would only be local to that specific instance, meaning that if I were to refresh the app or back away and come back into it, it wouldn't know who you are anymore. It would start the chatbot over again. But you can still use that OpenAI with history and everything, and you can use a unique variable that gets set to a user-specific column. So that way every user who's using your app, whether they're signed in or not, has their own value inside of that column. And that's what you send to ChatGPT. And so then that way, when it's answering the question back and forth again, you just kind of hang on to that temporary session variable.
Nice. Question here from Maker. How do we let ChatGPT respond based on existing information? So if you have existing data, how would you use that?
So first, what I would do is I would take a look at last week's OpenAI video with Marco Volpato, because he showed how to ask a question about a table, which we didn't get a chance to get into today, but we do have a knowledge base section here. So maybe we want to pull out a specific response based upon a question. So what we could do is as part of this inquiry here, as part of our form container on the action, you would leverage not necessarily the send message to ChatGPT, but instead you would do the ask a question, or was it answer question about a table. And you kind of have a similar setup, right? Where our question can be that, again, the content that you're displaying here. And then you specify the table. So in this case, the source table could be our knowledge base. And then the answer, again, can still be in that response. So it could look at this connection template, let's say. And if I were to run this, it would only give us answers based upon our knowledge base. And as part of our prompt, we could say, if you don't know the answer, then tell me that you don't know the answer, or something like that. But this is the integration you would use, the answer question about a table.
Perfect. And we got another question here from Jonathan asking, for a chat style integration like this, if you're building something that's more conversational, would you want to use the new comments component or something?
I was thinking about that today too. Yes. If you want to create something a little more conversational, you could certainly do that, because just like the form container, if I were to add in a comments collection, which is new in Glide, which is fantastic, they have the same kind of thing. They have, again, you can add in these additional columns and the display here as well. So it's just a matter about how you're reading it. Now, the only difference would be that instead of it having the response be in its own column here, what you would need to do is you would have to add every time you want the chat bot to respond, it would have to be an add row, and where the role is not user anymore, but I think is it system? The other one, where the content here is the response in this case. So the response would be here, and then your user would be not you, but it would be like, help bot or something like that. And you would have to give it a name and an image, and that name and image is what would show up here under the user photo and username. The reason why I didn't show that today is because it adds a whole other layer of complex
Yeah.
complexity to it. But I thought about the exact same thing last night. I'm wondering, well, what if we could use the comments component? So I might create a video on that. So if I do, check out my YouTube channel maybe in the next few weeks or so and see if
that'd be fun.
yeah.
I love the comments component as well. I've been playing with it for some projects. It does add another level of complexity when you're configuring the comments component, but when you have it configured, it's great. It's great to have that in Glide now. Last question here from Keith. Your recommendation here, Robert. How do you evolve your app as OpenAI evolves?
Oh, good question. So when I'm thinking of OpenAI, there's a few different ways that I've seen it evolve just over the past few months. The first thing is the model itself, right? So at any point in time, you can dive into our action here, and you can adjust the model to point to, the newer model, so that way you get maybe a more detailed response or more a more accurate response. So as OpenAI evolves, right, that's one thing you can do. Just within the past couple of weeks, I've learned that OpenAI now allows you to specify the format that you want in its response. Like, do you want it to respond with just text, or do you want it to respond with code, or do you want it to respond with a CSV or a JSON structure? So that yet is not, or hasn't been built yet into our Glide prompting here, but I imagine at some point, once that becomes mainstream, we might even get another input here as to like output format, and you could type in JSON or rich text or HTML or whatever any of the options are, and then when it responds, it would respond with that specific format, which is very helpful in case you did want to have like a JSON response, where then you can use that and tweak that and adjust that throughout the rest of your app in terms of being able to read from that for display purposes. But it's a good, only the gods over at OpenAI know how it's going to evolve. So it's just a matter of just keeping current with its, to where, just keeping current with it. They do have a newsletter, so I subscribe to that newsletter. So whenever there's a new update that comes out, I see it. But it's really it, just kind of keeping current with it.
Nice. So basically, there's two parts here. Then I guess it's as OpenAI evolves, keeping tabs on what's happening with the evolution of their APIs and the things that you can do there, and then on our end, Glide, we're going to continue evolving our integration. So there are new things that you can hook into and define. We're going to keep building that out. So just stay on top of both sides. What can you do in Glide? What can you do in OpenAI? And evolve your apps that way.
Exactly.
All right. And the final question we ask everybody, what's your pro tip for folks building apps in Glide?
Oh my goodness. So one, it's kind of two-pronged. First, don't feel like you have to recreate the wheel. So ask questions. Glide has a very robust documentation center where you can go and see, and we have a wonderful education lead at Glide and they're constantly creating new documentation for all of these things that you're seeing in here. So visit that, learn. Glide has its own LMS, so learn from there. Go onto YouTube, see what these other experts are displaying on their YouTube channel, and you'll learn some kind of tricks of the trade from there. Go into our community and ask questions. That's just how you learn, just kind of be knee deep in it. But in terms of building an app from scratch, what I highly recommend is just knowing this concept of how you want your data to be structured, kind of coming full circle to what I started off with at the beginning here is, the layout and the functionality should come from how you have your data structured, because you don't want to start building and then realize you have to redo your whole data based upon what it is you're trying to do. So take some time before you even start building your app to make sure all of your buckets are in the right place. If you know you're going to have users and those users are submitting responses to certain inventory items, then you're going to have 3 tables: users, inventory items, and responses. So that already kind of shows you, how your data should be lined up. And then before you even start building the front end of your app, I highly recommend going into the data section, build out those tables, build out those columns, build out the relations, put in some dummy data before you even start building out the interface to add the data. So that way you know how everything's related to each other in the database here, and then go to your layout and start building out the functionality visually.
Fantastic. That is a combo tip right there. Love that so much. All righty. This has been an amazing build session. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Robert, for getting on here and taking us through that awesome demo.
My pleasure.
Everybody else, head over to Robert's YouTube channel. There's constant videos coming out, tips, tutorials, a great back catalog of introductory stuff too. It's a fantastic resource. Head over that way, and let me throw up the address there. There you go. And then, of course, over on our side, if you head over to glideapps.com/events, you'll be brought to our events calendar. We have more sessions coming up about Glide with AI. Next week, we are doing some awesome stuff with Grumo, also another Glide YouTuber, doing some more advanced OpenAI work. And if you haven't started building yet, Glide is free to get started with. Head over to glideapps.com, start playing around for free. OpenAI, the OpenAI integration is available in our free plan. And we'll wrap it there. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. See you next time. See you next week. And until then, glide on.